Hey everyone, in this video I will be discussing the good and bad of Kingdom Hearts 3. I will split up this video into two segments. The first will be the good, and then following will be the bad. Let's get started. I will break down everything into categories of gameplay. We have combat, menuing, movement, exploration, Gummi missions, Disney worlds, and miscellaneous stuff. I will start off with the combat, as that is for me the main attraction of Kingdom Hearts games. Kingdom Hearts 3 boasts many different types of combat options, and in that regard, it does deliver. You have regular physical combos, magic, shot locks, limits, links aka summons, air step, attractions, and forms for the Keyblades that completely change your physical combos and magics. So what did they do well here? For starters, I greatly enjoy being able to Keyblade swap in a fight. That's a new feature I did not see coming, and it definitely is neat to be able to on the fly choose which forms in a fight you'd want, such as in Kingdom Hearts 2 when you would decide if you'd rather go into different forms sometimes. This time you can go into 3 and have all 3 be active at once. It was also awesome that you can store these Keyblade transformations by swapping them out, and they stay stored for a very long time, to the point where I honestly don't know how long. This also adds a bit of depth because your stats are tied to which Keyblade you're currently using, so if you're using a strength-based Keyblade, you'd want to swap to a magic one to use magic more effectively than only keep the strength Keyblade on. It's also pretty awesome how you can now act out of combos fast with dodging options. This was a very welcome new mechanic to the series that 0.2 allowed you to do as well. You can now guard mid-combo, dodge roll, or air slide to safety if you're in danger. With the addition of air guard, this also greatly improves defensive play. You can even act out of guard fast too. This is something you couldn't do in KH1 or 2. Next, a new addition is the ability to air step across arenas to either objects or enemies. For combat, it's used to close gaps against enemies. With how big arenas are now, this is awesome to be able to get on enemies quickly instead of slowly chase them down. I've heard talks of people trying to advocate that air step is broken or to force it to have a cost to use, but personally I don't see it that way at all. Anytime you air step, you're open to get hit if the enemy isn't open. To get free openings with air step that you create yourself, you have to use some sort of attack, either shot lock, which uses focus, or magic, which uses MP. So then the only possibility is camping fights with air step. But to be honest, as you can see here, it works similar in KH2FM. You can always choose to camp and create openings this way, but most don't. And if you design enemies that can get around it, then camping won't matter. But camping has always been a possibility to abuse in fights across the whole series. Anyway, let's talk about enemy design in this game. I will say with full confidence that this is Osaka Team's best enemy design yet. They are no Tokyo Team, but the improvements appear to be there. For mob fights, they definitely broke away a bit from 0.2's horrendous design of having 20 strong enemies that can snipe you constantly without warning from behind. There are still some cases where this can happen, but to be honest, even in 2FM, it wasn't perfect either all the time. Mob fight design is tricky. A lot of it can be improved by having proper crowd control options. For example, in 2FM there are definitely some insanely annoying enemies, but proper crowd control can make them much more manageable without getting randomly hit constantly, if you understand the game well. In KH3, it does feel like there is at least decent crowd control options, though this time it's pretty hard to avoid getting hit sometimes, but you shouldn't be getting dunked on at least, which is a nice improvement over 0.2's mob design. It's hard to also make it so that enemies are not too passive, sitting there doing nothing, so this was a decent middle ground setup to go with overall. As for boss design, I'm happy to say that bosses now generally have pretty dodgeable and reactable attacks, as well as they have clear openings where they can even stagger to base physical hits. This was a welcome improvement over the handheld boss design of you go to hit them when they should be open, but then they either just super armor hit you or break out of your combo randomly. Moving on, let's discuss the org battles in Keyblade Graveyard. To me, these were some of the more fun fights of the game, yet many people were complaining that it wasn't what they wanted. I've heard people wanting 13 separate fights or wanting allies to be taken out. To this, I say that if difficulty is the reason you didn't like these fights, critical mode may help a bit, speaking as someone who did a hacked critical mode playthrough already. Aesthetically, I thought these fights were amazing. I personally believe that if they made them all separate, it would have dragged on very long in Keyblade Graveyard. They definitely could have put them in other worlds as you progress, but since that wasn't the design choice, this is what we have now. I'd definitely be okay with fleshed out versions of each org member being super bosses, but for the story fights, this works well. Also, don't forget each org member has about 3 to 4 attacks, which would be rather boring and too easy if they were all by themselves. They also had the smart design of having one org member target you at a time, so long as your allies are alive, so that way you don't get unfairly smacked around as easily. Not just that, but the designs of the org members are fairly true to the original. For example, Riku Ansem is just like in KH1, where an aerial Sora is very effective against him, while Xigbar is an interesting hybrid of KH2 and BBS. Not to mention, the amount of fun I have in the triple Xehanort fight is pretty high. I've also heard complaints that Roxas beats down Saïx so much that it's not even worth participating in the fight, and to that, I say it was likely the full intention. If you've played Final Fantasy games before, this is a classic example of a display fight. It's a fight where either you die to progress, or you either overpower or an ally overpowers the enemy. In these cases, you tend to be in an OP type situation, so in that regard, that fight was amazing to see it play out. Before I forget, I almost didn't mention revenge value in this game. This was a mechanic that disappeared from the series after Kingdom Hearts 2 up until 0.2 brought it back for a handful of fights. So what did this game do with it? Well, it does have a revenge value system in place, which is awesome that they didn't go backwards. It's not the same as KH2 though. This time around, if you hit a boss's revenge value, they will break out as normal. But if you stop your combo before that and leave them alone, their revenge value will stay intact until they take action again. It is a little janky, but still a huge improvement over the handheld's design, and I'm glad it's back. Lastly, how about the final boss segment of this game? Well, I do take a bit of an issue with the Xehanort clones fight due to feeling like it's absurdly harder than it should be in terms of how easy it is to get smacked around during trying to hit the clones, but they go down to Eroga into Erosa spam real fast. But perhaps I don't know the full mechanics of the enemies there yet to have a full opinion, but it definitely was an aesthetically neat fight. So while I would love to complain about this fight here, I'm still also being cautious that I may be missing key factors to the fight. Now we get to Goatnort, and to be honest, it's still an improvement of a boss fight over Osaka's other games. The boss has clear patterns, dodgeable and blockable attacks that allow you to counter back, and it's fairly fun to do so as well. People dog on the water segment hard, but do remember that Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 had their fair share of garbage final boss parts, unless you heavily enjoyed fighting incredibly strong mob enemies in nearly pitch-black rooms, or a long drawn-out minigame that serves no purpose other than to brag about how cool such an old game was able to pull this off. So in that regard, the water part is really about the same as those, and while I would do away with it if I could, I don't see the point in heavily bashing the game over it if you thought KH1 and 2 had awesome final boss segments, but that the water segment here was a deal breaker. As for the actual final fight, I thought it was pretty intense still. What really made it intense was Rage Form into his Desperation move, which is probably one of the most insane DMs I've seen a boss do in the series. The only real downside here was that Xehanort had a fairly small pool of attacks, and 90% of it was teleport guard spam, but we'll save that criticism for the other part of this video. Admittedly, I would have loved a final attack sequence similar to KH2's with Sora's heavy beatdown of Xemnas, but this was an okay end too, where Sora gains strength through his two main companions for the entire series to help deliver the final blow. Next category I will discuss is menuing. The menu system in this game is pretty strong overall. It's very quick and responsive, which is something that hasn't really happened since 2FM. The layout has a very Final Fantasy XV feel, and also a more modern feel. A cool new menu mechanic is being able to upgrade your keyblades, something that Recoded played around with. This time around, it's essentially a little synthing mechanic where you use some materials to level up your keyblade, and doing so gives you an increase to either strength or magic, as well as sometimes an ability attached. I thought that this was neat because it allows you to try to stick with a keyblade you like even if its stats aren't that great. In Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, if you liked Kingdom Key the most, it generally was a decent disadvantage to use most of the time outside of early game, while in Kingdom Hearts 3, it's pretty useful keyblade with the ability to handle mobs and single target enemies. This game also introduces cooking as a way of increasing your stats for a temporary amount of time. If you played Final Fantasy XV, you're probably already somewhat familiar with how this works. Basically, you can cook or buy meals to attach to your cuisine. If you do a full course meal, aka filling all the slots, then you get a bonus as well. To be honest, this feature is pretty neat. The game rewards you for making food by either spending money or gathering ingredients that actually can help you in combat. A small addition to the customized menu also actually impressed me. Now you can set Dolan to only cure you. So the people that always complain that Dolan sucked at healing or healed the wrong person, these settings will help you tweak him to be an awesome heal bot. Not only that, but you can also customize even summons so that you don't have to slowly try to navigate to them in the menu. Lastly, for menuing, I was rather impressed by the config options in this game. Cage always has config options, but they added even more options such as camera movement speeds, animations for multiple things being on or off, etc. There's never anything wrong with having too many config options to tweak gameplay to one's preferences. Now we have movement to talk about. This game introduced wall running into the series, which we already knew was a positive mechanic due to allowing worlds to now have more verticality to it. Some worlds, such as San Francisco, took full advantage of this mechanic to allow you to scale buildings to get amazing views. Adding air stepping into the mix just makes it that much better. So as far as movement goes in this game, I think it's an incredible improvement in the series after Cage 2 killed off platforming until 2FM tried to bring it back a bit. Moving on to exploration, let's talk about how the large world design worked for this game. Well, some worlds did fare better than others in the exploration aspect. For example, the Caribbean has the best exploration of the game, where you can eventually use your boat to explore islands for tons of chests and enemies to fight, as well as lucky emblems too. Then others, such as Monsters Inc., were basically just large hallways, so there wasn't much room for exploration outside the main path. I still think it's a great improvement over what we usually have gotten, and can't wait to see it taken even further in future games, since it's nice to be rewarded for exploring a world to make it worth it. So now I will talk about Gummi missions in Kingdom Hearts 3. In the past, I've greatly disliked Gummi missions in both KH1 and 2. To me, they are just time-wasting pads to gameplay that aren't even that fun. This game claimed Gummi missions now to be open world, so how did that fare? Well, as it turns out, they did keep pretty true to that. You can avoid nearly everything Gummi related. Going from world to world is a matter of 1 minute or less, depending on your ship's speed. You are also forced to do 3 boss fights, but with a custom Gummi, even from early game, you can slay these fights quickly. So for someone who hates Gummi related stuff, this game does you a huge favor in keeping it minimal, which I believe is the right approach. Even going for Gummi missions 100% isn't terribly bad and much less painful than in 1FM or 2FM. So I hope they stick with this design if they insist on keeping Gummis, because I think it works well in the game compared to the last 2. Now moving on, it's time to talk about the Disney worlds and what was good about them in this game. First, we have Olympus. I think this was a strong Disney world. It felt like a solid amount of length, though there were some large hallway type design parts, but then eventually you're in a big open area that allows you to explore. For a tutorial type world, it did a good job of not making it extremely boring and giving you good progression to give Sora all of his gameplay mechanics but not dump them all on you at once. Overall, it was a strong way to start the game. Next, we have Toy Box. I will reserve my issues for the other part of the video, but for the positive side, this world did have good things happening in it. Even though San Francisco did this too, I thought it was cool that the toy store was basically one giant room with floors, and it felt as if the area promoted exploration more than some other worlds. Essentially, Toy Box is 2 areas, the first being Andy's room with the outside, while the rest is one giant toy store. The third Disney world of the first group was Corona, and this world I felt was hands down my favorite. It was a very charming world in both presentation and gameplay. There weren't a whole lot of gimmicks either that were spammed, such as in Toy Box. It had neat optional interactions with Rapunzel that rewarded you with AP boosts if you did each one. Between the cutscenes, atmosphere, and interactions, I did greatly enjoy this world as well. Next up, we have Monsters Inc. At first, I don't think I cared much about this world, but upon further playthroughs, I actually came to terms with its simplicity and think it's not too shabby. This world definitely is the most linear in terms of you literally are running through hallways, but it does work just fine here since you are in a building. It also had fairly challenging fights that you just can't easily plow through on Proud due to the large beetle-type enemies that required thought to take down without getting smacked around. Sully and Mike were also pretty interesting having around as well. Next world is Frozen, and unfortunately I don't have a ton of good things to talk about with this world. It was neat in terms of verticality at least, also I did enjoy the marshmallow fight, and in terms of presentation, the skull fight was incredible and the most intense boss fight up to this part of the game by a large margin. Otherwise, nothing else stood out to me here outside of cutscenes, and some parts of the world had cool scenery as well. Next, we had the Caribbean. Those of you who already know how I feel about this world are expecting not much to be said here. However, I must praise this world in its visual presentation. It's graphically a stunning world, and it makes exploring that much more exciting. This world gives you the option to explore the islands with your ship however you want, and it's incredibly rewarding to do so as you get many chests that have various valuable goodies. Even if at the end of the day it was just exploring similar islands that had about the same rewards, it felt exciting to not know what was waiting for you on the larger islands. And if you were smart enough to do this early on, you likely stumbled upon the crab-infested island to get an easy max level ship. So as far as that goes, I give this world a good amount of credit for doing that. The underwater movement isn't too shabby either, as Sora can speed through the water rather fast, which is nice that they didn't make the same mistake many other games do of sluggish underwater movement to get around. The last Disney World to talk about would be San Francisco. This is a world I wasn't super interested in going into it, but honestly it was a fairly okay world to me. The city was visually impressive, and scoping out the area on top of skyscrapers was pretty cool, as well as it felt amazing to free fall down from them. Taking advantage of air stepping here was also an awesome way to quickly get around and up buildings. The Flash Tracer minigame wasn't too bad either, since it had some neat aerial movement going on during it, which was refreshing after the Caribbean. So overall, between all the Disney Worlds, I thought most of them were pretty well done still. It's a good time and it felt like an overall improvement to the way Disney Worlds are handled. I think some people trying to trash most of the Disney Worlds forgot how they were done in the past. Last segment I'd like to discuss is the miscellaneous section. Let's kick it off with graphics. In case you didn't catch on to earlier parts of the video, this game is definitely graphically impressive. The jump between Kingdom Hearts 2 to 3 is staggering, and it's pretty hard for me to want to nitpick anything graphics related. Each Disney World is pretty graphically stunning and beautiful to look at and observe, as well as the non-Disney worlds. The cutscenes are all visually done well, while also keeping the KH charm of them that differs from some of Square's other series, such as Final Fantasy. I can safely say I don't feel any disappointment here in the graphics department. This also is true for the music. The quality of music in this game is astounding. They essentially use every battle theme across the entire series thus far, as well as a bunch of other themes, while remixing most of them as well. Battle themes like the Triple Xehanort fight was godly to listen to while fighting all three of them. It was everything I could have imagined. Even all the Disney World bosses had awesome themes that were, to me, better than usual. It boggles my mind that some people still like to complain about the soundtrack in this game. I don't know how you could be disappointed that Rowdy Rumble or The Corrupted didn't play for half the boss fights, or perhaps they just couldn't get enough of the Dream Eater boss music from DDD. Who knows what crazy silly reasons, but I think it's a travesty to not recognize how great this soundtrack really is when you judge it as a whole. I understand that some people wanted all new music, but we still did get a lot of new music on top of remixed music of fantastic songs from the rest of the series. I praise the diversity in the music because if you didn't like a reoccurring song in the other KH games for any fights, you'd get sick of hearing it and be stuck with it. While in this game there were so many different songs, my interest in what song would play next was extremely high. Anyway, I'll quickly mention that an underappreciated aspect of this game was the sound work. If you didn't play this game with a decent headset, you probably missed out, but the sound work with a headset is excellent. The bass that you hear in certain parts of the game was very satisfying, such as killing certain enemies near the end of the game, as well as striking the final blow against Xehanort. I have absolutely nothing bad to say about sounds honestly, and I hope this stays the standard for the series. So that about wraps up the good for the game. I likely missed things I still enjoyed, but throwing it all into a single video like this is quite difficult, and there are always tiny aspects you don't realize are good, making it hard to remember to write about it. But while some people are relentlessly trashing the game, I'd like to point out all the great things the game did for the series that get swept under the rug for what they did wrong, since there are a lot that was done really well in this game still. Now it is time to tackle the bad. Unfortunately, I do have a lot to say here. Some of the bad I believe they can improve on, while some of it I don't believe they will be able to fix. If you thought Kingdom Hearts 3 was a 10 out of 10 flawless game, then this part is pointless to watch, and you may as well go back into your house of ignorance and carry on. However, as most people know me these days, I'm very critical of the design of Kingdom Hearts games, having been a fan of the series since KH1 Original came out in the States. We got 0.2 and 2.5 to be patched better with speaking out, so let's not stop while they're listening. Now that we know they intend to balance and tweak the game some more, it is a great time to get our voices heard. Many issues I bring up will be already painfully obvious to players after one playthrough, but then others may be a little bit more subtle to the point where even still I keep noticing small things that make no sense in the gameplay, or that are becoming more increasingly of an issue the more I play. However, note that we are in a state of be careful what you wish for with this game. Let me bring up Kingdom Hearts 1 for what I mean. Remember back when that game first released, much of the outcry outside of the camera was that the platforming was complete garbage and unbearable. So what did Square do in response to this? Instead of creating tighter platforming and movement, they pretty much completely removed any need to ever do any platforming as a response. Of course, eventually when 2FM came out, they introduced a platforming dungeon which showcased that KH2 actually did have the potential for platforming all along. But the funny thing was that KH1's platforming honestly wasn't too bad if you knew how to control Sora really well. The point being here that we don't want to complain about something and have it either outright removed or nerfed so heavily into the ground that it isn't even worth using. The goal here is to point out the issues and throw out possible solutions to help. Now also keep in mind that since the game is new, there are still elements we may not fully understand. A perfect example of this was in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, especially in 2. Imagine if KH2 came out in today's age and all of our video feedback was saying, wow, summons sure are useless, they do almost nothing. Now, KH2 sucked at explaining summons, but as we've come to learn, they're actually incredibly amazing in this game if you know how they work. But who would easily figure this out on a first playthrough? So it would be foolish to try to ask for buffs and nerfs of things that may actually be fine. Keep this in mind when judging fights, that it could be simply lack of knowledge of how certain enemies work. However, it is still worth noting issues regardless in case it isn't just a lack of knowledge. Anyway, let's get started on this. I will break down all of the issues into categories of gameplay just like with the other part of the video. We have combat, menuing, movement, exploration, Gummi missions, Disney worlds, and miscellaneous stuff. I will begin with the combat segment since to me that is the main reason I've enjoyed Kingdom Hearts in the past. Let's start it off with one of the highest complaints of combat, which is difficulty and post-game. As of right now, I feel like I have not seen a single person say that this game is in any way challenging compared to the other games. And you know what? They're right. But to be honest, it definitely is more complicated than that because of the way difficulty has been handled in the past games. For example, Kingdom Hearts 2 was originally released with the same 3 difficulty modes, and believe it or not, in terms of normal casual play, Proud Mode in Kingdom Hearts 2 is extremely similar. In KH2 Original, most people won't have a fair chance at dying until Demyx, Zaldin, or perhaps even Xigbar and Final Xemnas. If you keep up near the battle levels, you are nearly invincible otherwise to mash away. KH3 runs a bit similar, where on regular Proud Mode playthroughs, you don't have many chances to just straight out die outside of minigames. Although in Kingdom Hearts 2's defense here, the game had high battle level post-game content as small as it was. You have Sephiroth and then Hades' Paradox Cup. If you just waltz into Sephiroth for the first time on Proud without knowing the fight right after you beat the game, you're likely going to be hurting, or if you try to take on Paradox Cups too early. If you fight Dark Inferno for the first time on Proud if you're above level 40, you will have a hard time dying more than a couple times. This is likely because the battle level in the Dark Inferno fight is low, since the battle level of the world post-game is under 50. So jumping into this unprepared is not as much of a deficit as Sephiroth or the Paradox Cups. Even in KH1 English original version, we had pretty rough fights on expert mode before 1FM came out, where we had Sephiroth, Kurt Zisa, Ice Titan, and to a smaller extent, Phantom. Many people are saying it's unfair to compare KH3 to 1FM and 2FM, since they are essentially DLC type games. While that's true, you would have thought in 2019 that the devs would have been a little bit more prepared to offer at least a slightly better post-game for combat enthusiasts. It is quite difficult to live up to 2FM's amount of post-game content, but I feel as if we really have nothing to do in KH3 after beating the game, other than collecting things we didn't already get during the game. What also hurts this situation is that we've been built up to expect critical mode being available now in our KH games. To me, I figured 2FM set the standard of what the game's hardest difficulty should be like. BBS launched with critical mode, Recoded had critical mode setting, DDD had critical mode unlocked by beating the game, and so did 0.2. So it is no surprise that the players who always played highest difficulties across the series be a bit confused that not only is Proud the hardest, but with lack of challenging post-game content. On the plus side, we have a critical mode confirmed soon. This is obviously a huge plus, but until its release, the game feels like a complete joke in difficulty. Trying to tell people that they must play low level or level 1 to have a challenge isn't a way to pretend this issue does not exist. The entire point on why difficulty is a problem right now is that we've had basic expectations across the series of what a challenge should look like, and them excluding critical mode on launch on top of lack of post-game combat challenges significantly hurt the game's appeal. Perhaps when all the DLC is out, we'll have a hard and fun critical mode with fun super bosses, but until then, this is a large issue to many. Another hot topic of complaint towards the combat system is the camera. It still confuses me greatly why the camera has been so poor when we had an incredibly solid camera system in 2FM. The camera tends to spaz quite often and also loves to run away from Sora when targeting on large enemies. To me, it makes no sense why it isn't better. There are times where the camera zooms out so far you can barely tell where you are or what is going on. Not to mention the other problem of terrain blocking your view during Combat 2, which is also a problem that happened in Final Fantasy XV a lot. Not just that, but there are forced cinematics that can steal the camera away from Sora, such as Magnet Burst in second form. Since you are able to turn off other cinematics, I don't see why this shouldn't be an option too. Personally, when I'm in combat, I like the camera to stay on my character and not fly around the place. There isn't much else to say about the camera, but I feel as if in 2019, the standards should be a bit higher for a camera in a Kingdom Hearts game when a KH game over 10 years older did it better. Next complaint is another common one and is sort of part of the camera category, which is the lock-on system. Unless there's some secret option hidden somewhere, in this game for some insane reason you can't target onto an enemy that isn't directly in your sight. This is incredibly baffling and makes trying to lock onto enemies a giant chore, since the game loves to unlock from enemies quite often. So to target enemies behind you, you must spin the camera towards them. It should definitely just simply lock onto the nearest enemy, as it has done across the entire series. That's not even the biggest offender of lock-on. What's even worse is the game implements target switching, but it doesn't even work half the time. As with the previous issue, you can't target switch to anything behind you, but what's worse is half the time it just eats the input, and there's also a bizarre delay in the switch as well. Granted, KH2 had a convoluted way of target switching that also had flaws, but if you're offering a target system with target switching again between two buttons, it should work well to make it worth using. As of right now, to target switch, I need to run around waiting about a second between each target switch attempt to make sure I'm about to attack the correct enemy. It's a virtually worthless feature the way they set it up and really needs fixing. Moving on, one of the larger complaints I've seen people mention about this game is how attraction flows are handled. This game absolutely loves to spam you attraction flows so that they clutter up your situation commands, and they also happen to deal insane damage for nearly free. The game also throws you multiple abilities to not only extend the amount of time they are available to activate, but also how frequently they show up. I've seen many people say a simple solution is to have an ability to turn them off. However, as much as I'd still like to have that as an option, it's not a fix to the design of attractions. The flaw lies in situation commands in general a bit, but attractions are extreme because they show up very frequently and do crazy damage with little thought from the player. The funny thing I've noticed is that in my multiple level 1 playthroughs, attractions actually are not that bad. They don't deal a crazy amount of damage, but just contribute a bit most of the time. So while having an option to turn them off would help if you don't want them to ever show up, that won't solve the problem of first-time players getting them for free and having them shred through mob fights for them. So instead, having them deal less damage would help a lot. Attractions are still good crowd control, so removing a crowd control option would be a poor choice to me, but it also shouldn't auto-win you fights or deal bars of damage. What's more is that these trigger really easily because any AoE attacks will trigger them, such as using thunder on multiple enemies. So another possible workaround is only allowing one attraction per fight to be triggerable. Between that and a damage reduction, we have a less brain-dead way of shredding mob fights. Now, I don't know if this is also something they would be willing to do, but I would certainly love these to not show up as randomly. In forced fights, most of them are pretty predictable, but still random. In non-forced fights, you're going to have no idea when they'll show up or which one will even show up, which I think is something worth fixing. Next, we have limits. In KH1 and KH2, you had to equip limits to be able to use them. In KH1, they used certain amounts of MP, while in KH2, they would use the rest of your MP left. This time around, they made the poor choice of having them show up randomly in fights outside of player control. Personally, I much rather have had it be selectable from a menu with some sort of cost, rather than, oh, here it is, out of nowhere, no reason not to do it. In some cases, it does incredible damage, but in other cases, it does very little depending on the fights they randomly show up in. A problem in KH2's limits was that they were a bit underutilized, but that is also the game's fault for not really explaining any of them or how they work. In KH3, they have on-screen pop-ups on how links work, so I imagine it would be rather easy to do the same with limits and have them be equipable abilities that dip into some resource, possibly MP again. Although they are not really spammy broken attacks, it's just another case of brain-dead situation command pops up for no reason, so you may as well use it. Another possible solution is to have the limits somehow have meters, so that at least it's not unpredictable when limits are available, if they refuse to let them be abilities. Though if I don't want to use a limit because it's not that great, why would I want it cluttering up my situation commands in the first place? So links were definitely pretty slept on in this game, which is no surprise since it was that way in both KH1 and 2. Although for those games, they didn't give you on-screen tutorials for the summons. In KH2, you had to go to the status menu and pick a summon to get a rough idea of what they even do. In this game, they give you a tutorial, but the issue was that they require a full MP bar to use. So that already is not a big incentive to use them, since magic is already pretty ridiculous in this game. Why bring out a link when you can nuke an enemy with fire spam or enemies with arrow and thunder spam? Well, as it turns out, links are actually incredibly strong in this game, to the point of easily being considered fairly broken. I imagine there is an oversight, but there should be no reason you can nearly one-shot a couple bosses with links. But most of this stuff is not possible to do on a first playthrough. So link mechanics causes 2 issues that need to be fixed, as well as a 3rd issue that likely won't be changed. First, links should absolutely still not require full MP. Making the choice between magic or links seems like poor design if you care about combat diversity like I do. Doing magic combos and then leading into a strong link before going into MP charge seems like a hell of a lot more interesting than just deciding to only use a link because they are better crowd nukes than arrow and thunder spam. Secondly, links are definitely too strong. Links are tied to magic stats, so if you buff up your magic, your links will deal god damage all over the place. Meow Wow is a bit more balanced, and Stitch is obtained too late to be abused heavily, while Ralph can almost one-shot some bosses, as can Ariel. Third issue with links is that they tend to be a little brain dead. For Meow Wow, you're just gonna spam jump a few times and then deflate until you are about to run out of the link, where you do the finisher. For Simba, you can literally just hold a direction while mashing attack to do crazy AoE damage to everything around you. And Ariel is just timing jump and then mashing attack a bunch. Ralph and Stitch are a little less brain dead in terms of usage, but still incredibly strong, although Ralph actually most of the time requires heavy knowledge to use effectively. This ties into what I miss from KH2 summons, which is that they are basically strong supporters to have onto the field, while Sora can still do normal combat. I can't speak for others, but I really enjoyed that I couldn't just whip out a summon in KH2 that deals god AoE damage while I'm only mashing one button. For example, it's amazing that Chicken Little can bring enemies to you, but then you have to plan what to do about that while the enemies are pulled in. If you do nothing, you'll get countered. It allowed for interesting strategies such as doing AoE fire or thunder, or later in the game you do explosion or finishing leap. Imagine if you just whipped out Chicken Little and you press one button and he brings in enemies and AoE damages them to death. That wouldn't be as fun and skillful. Unfortunately, I don't think they will change this, but that's a big bummer for me because that's what I enjoyed about summons in KH2. But anyway, to summarize links, what they could easily change to better balance them and have better combat diversity options is to allow you to use a link with any amount of MP left, perhaps also limiting each link to 1 use per fight, and also heavily toning down the damage output they do in this case. That way, smarter players will do interesting things like do a form combo or magic combos with MP until they are about to run out, go into a link, and then afterwards fall back into another strategy during MP charge, rather than the way it is now where you think, oh, here are mob enemies and I have Simba. Let me just hold down a direction while mashing attack and I win for free. So next up, we have situation commands. 0.2 introduced us into how these were going to work, and the idea behind them was pretty solid where you dish out enough hits on enemies and depending on what you're using, depends on what type of situation commands you get. It sounds pretty cool this way. Unfortunately, in 0.2, we noticed that there was a bit of randomness to what you get. For example, if you do Thunder, Fire, and Blizzard during your combos until you build up your situation commands, you may get all three of them as situation commands, or perhaps even none of them and instead get Spellweaver. KH3 slightly made this even worse. Not only is it still random, but if you're using any equipment that come with random ZA magic, then that may even take over your situation commands. For example, if you equip the Fire Cufflink, but you're trying to get into a form or using other magic, it might trigger Faraza only instead, even if you didn't use a single fire magic. I've even had cases where I'd be using Thunder on enemies, have nearly 3 full arrows for the situation command, go to hit an enemy once, and then get the form change only instead of the Thunder command. To me, it makes no sense why we work hard to get these situation commands only for it to end up being random. If you're willing to mix up your magic on enemies to get multiple grand magic commands, then you should be rewarded that way. Otherwise, you'll feel limited in your magic use, where you'd likely only want to spam one magic to nearly ensure you hopefully get that grand magic. This is something I really hope they change in future updates. Last bit to throw into here that bugs me is that if you're building up your arrows for another situation command, but you end up form reverting or using a situation command, you lose those arrows. I'm not entirely sure what the intention from the design aspect is here, but to me it's unfortunate because it makes it harder to chain the combat together. This should also have a simple fix, unless I'm missing a way this can be heavily abused. So now I get to talk about magic in this game. Boy, do things get a bit messy here. So the game offers you 3 types of builds for your playthrough. You can go with strength, magic, or both. The problem here is that magic is too good in this game. In KH1 and 2, it was also very strong if utilized properly, but in KH3 there are some heavy oversights. For starters, fire is definitely way too strong in this game. Just go with a magic build and any single target boss generally falls to fire spam. Throw in some ethers in there so you don't have a cooldown with MP and literally nearly everything dies to it without much effort. The starting magic of the game should not be that effective, in my opinion. To make things worse, you can get the Fire Cufflink accessory near the beginning of Toy Box, the second Disney World. This allows you to get Faraza spam as well, which is an easy way to nuke an HP bar off of a boss on top of the fire spam before it doing the same. There are a few reasons fire works this well to spam. For one, nearly nothing has resistance to it. Secondly, fire has typically costed low amounts of MP across the series. Thirdly, it tracks enemies and has large range. Unless there are enemies that can outspeed or out-teleport it, they are likely getting hit by it. This allows you to sit back across the arena and safely brain-dead spam it without worry. I've seen people try to come up with solutions for this, such as increasing the amount of MP fire uses. I personally don't think that's a fix, since ethers bypass that anyway. It would simply have to just be less strong across most of the game. I would also recommend removing Fire Cufflink out of Toy Box and putting it much later if they insist on keeping those items. Outside of Fire, to me, nothing else comes close, but Arrow and Thunder are still pretty strong with magic builds. It's not nearly as ridiculous as Fire Spam though. I also had a hard time trying to make Blizzard a useful spell at all. It appears to have very minimal uses and still does not outshine the other magic options. Essentially, the magic in this game could use more balancing. At all costs, I definitely recommend a fire nerf though. The way you can spam fire in this game is heavily reminiscent of Balloonra spam in DDD. It's nearly the same, just not quite as infinitely spammable and slightly less damage output, but same concept of why balancing is important. Last little note here is that it was a bit disappointing how magic works in the forums. I already speculated this problem when I played the demo, but most of the forums really just change your projectile magic into AoE. It sounded exciting at first to see magic work differently in forums, but it feels as if they lost creativity once they decided that if you have a projectile magic, that it's suddenly AoE, always in the same way too. Some forum magic was interesting, such as arrow guns and magic launcher turning all magic into homing projectiles, but that was really all about it for creativity. My hope here is that they put a tad more effort when they release the DLC throughout the year to make the magic a bit more interesting in the forums. So this game also retains the shotlock mechanic that BBS introduced, which we've also seen implemented into 0.2. In BBS, if you were not under level too much, shotlock spam won you the game pretty easily. In 0.2, while shotlock was still very strong, it wasn't common to get your focus back too easily in that game, so it felt a bit more balanced. In Cage 3, the shotlock system is pretty close to 0.2's. The only flaw to me is that shotlock still does a tad too much damage with certain keyblades. For example, Ever After shotlock is absurdly strong, and in Kingdom Hearts 3 there are more chances to restore focus between fights, which makes it so that you'd be self-imposing a challenge to yourself to not just waste 2 fully locked on shotlocks at the beginning of every fight. I don't consider shotlocks as brain dead strong as Fire Spam or Simba, but it's still pretty up there, and I feel it should be hit with the damage nerf a little bit. So we've known for a while that flow motion was making a return in Cage 3 from DDD, but it was definitely hit hard with nerfing. You can no longer just spam it in mob fights and deal crazy damage like in DDD if you were leveled properly. My only real complaint here is that the only flow motion that you can't turn off is the incredibly annoying jump you get while casting Arrow. You can turn off every flow motion except for that. In Cage 2, if you crowd controlled with Magnet, you usually wanted to do something effective to the enemy while they're stunned, such as a physical combo or other magic. With Arrow, if you dare try to physically combo the enemy while they're stuck in Arrow, you're going to get auto-jumped into the air, where the drop-down flow motion attack is your only real option. This also gets triggered easily if you're sliding around using Arrow. This seems like it's an easy fix. If players really want to jump out of Arrow, they can keep that ability on. It's very simple. This may be a small nitpick, but I've seen others mention it too, which is the buffer system in the game. 0.2 also had a similar crazy buffer system. If you don't get what this means, essentially in games if you input an action during another action, it will queue it up and still perform the action if the game has a long enough buffer system. This is good to have some sort of buffer system, but for some reason in Cage 3 it's too good. It's almost as if you can fully buffer a full physical combo from the first hit of a combo. I don't see this being necessary since it also hurts reactionary gameplay when you're supposed to be able to act out of combos fast if you need to. To me, I feel as if it would be easy to tweak this a small bit or even add a config option to have a buffer slider for advanced players. So a cool feature, once again, of the combat system in this game is that you can act out of combos fast into other actions, which also includes keyblade switching. However, for some reason, there's a large delay in keyblade switching mid-combo. It's so bad that some enemies nearly can recover from stagger when you do it. I'm unsure from a programming perspective why this happens, but it hurts wanting to switch keyblades in a combo. I feel as if this shouldn't work this way, and that it also hurts potential combo options with keyblade switching. So this complaint ties into discussing magic earlier. This game allows you to obtain access to the highest tier grand magic of water and fire entirely too early in this game. You can get the water cufflink halfway through Olympus, the first world in the game, and you can get fire cufflink in the second world toy box. This allows you to be able to use Waterza and Faraza very early. To put it into perspective, it would be like in Cage 2 if you had early access to Magnega or Reflega. That game also does not give you easy access to strong accessories or armor, which is really how it should be to me. I don't see why they can't push those accessories out of those worlds and into later game. This next complaint is one I didn't quite catch onto for my first playthrough, but the more I play, the more annoying it gets. There is a wall knockback mechanic where enemies that are comboed into a wall, specifically humanoid enemies, they get a special knockback animation. And that's fine, however, they recover from stagger much faster this way, which I feel is the opposite of what should happen during a wall knockback. This makes trying to land certain moves more likely to fail, such as trying to hit Xehanort with Magic Flash. I feel as if it would make much more sense if they change it so that a wall knockback gives you a bigger opportunity rather than less to continue a combo. Yet another small nitpick I feel should have an easy fix is aerial combos near the ground. In this game, it is literally impossible to start an aerial combo on a grounded enemy and have it stay an aerial combo. In Cage 1 and 2, so long as you timed it correctly or in other cases, mashed hard enough, you could do an aerial combo on grounded enemies just fine. But in Cage 3, you snap to the ground during an aerial combo if you're close enough, and it turns your finishers into ground finishers. This greatly hurts crowd control finishers in forms such as Magnet Burst in second form. A simple tweak to this would make much more sense. I've always enjoyed having the freedom to choose if I want an aerial combo on a grounded enemy, and I think for the third main entry in the series, it should have continued that trend of letting the player choose. This next section of combat, I will talk about the mob fights and bosses. I've spoken in the good segment about the positives of these this time around, but now it's time to dip into the negatives. So as much as I've said that the mob fights were generally better this time than they have been in some of the other games, there are still silly problems. If you recall in one of my previous videos, I said the amount of enemies on screen and what kind of enemies they are has a huge influence in how the fight is designed. For example, doing a fight against 10 soldiers is a much different experience than a fight against 10 Mary Poppin Heartlesses. Just having one of these Heartless in a fight forces you to focus on them as they camp you from a distance. Personally, sometimes I do feel like there are too many enemies in one fight at once, and it's a pretty weird mix between them passively just sitting around waiting to die, and other times they just all attack at once. To me, it seemed a bit off, but the game still does offer decent crowd control to handle these situations. Early on, in places like Toy Box, it does get a bit annoying fighting the toy soldiers and having them just snipe you out of combos constantly due to them having long-range projectiles. Either way, moving on to bosses, one of the things that bugged me a tad was that form combos clearly had some high priority stagger ability on larger enemies, which is fine, but I have yet to figure out exactly when it does decide to safely stagger them. Sometimes you'll throw out a whole combo that the boss will super armor through, and other times it'll knock them into last week for no apparent reason. In 2FM, you generally had really telling openings that you could punish with any attack that is a hitbox and they will stagger. It wasn't flipping a coin to find out if the enemy is open, so while enemies do stagger now and have proper knockback, I do believe they should be more consistent. That is, unless I'm missing something on why sometimes they stagger, but then they use the same move again and suddenly they super armor through your attack. At least the plus side is due to this game's defense design, you can at least avoid getting hit if they don't stagger most of the time. As we're almost done with the combat section, you're probably wondering what I have to say about the game having floaty combat still. Well, as I said in my first impressions video, this game fully supports you being airborne for a long time. They made it so you still have strong defensive options in the air. It generally feels like you're safer in the air than on the ground, since quite a few enemies still have trouble hitting you in the air. However, I would argue that the clunkiness of some of the attacks still hurts you in the air. You can combo cancel still, but some attacks, especially quite a few form attacks, still don't cancel fast enough to where quite a few enemies can hit you if your attack doesn't stagger before you can buffer another action to cancel. Last segment to discuss in combat is Osaka Team's lack of having a proper damage scaling system, or in other terms, damage floors. If you've ever played BBS and DDD, you'll notice that as soon as you end up getting to a world that considers you underleveled, your attacks will start doing extremely minimal damage, and in a lot of cases for people, chip damage. This is a huge blow to challenge players because it kills the fun of the game to spend 20 minutes in fights chipping away at bosses' HP without abusing specific spammy attacks. In Cage 2, there is proper damage scaling so that if your stats are too low versus the battle level of a fight, you never do chip damage. Even on Proud mode where your damage multiplier is bad, you would still deal okay damage. Unfortunately, in Cage 3, Osaka Team still has not tried to replicate this mechanic. So if your stats are too low, you're doing chip garbage damage. Now, there are some workarounds to this. For one, all forms have the hidden potential ability, which means if you're underleveled, you'll be buffed anyway. And secondly, there's always food, or if you're okay with using stat boosts, the game loves to give them away like candy for some reason. However, this isn't a full answer to the problem. It means any attacks you do outside of a form won't do damage, and people who are level 1 purists will not accept having to spam stat boosts throughout the game to be able to get past this, since that in a way can defeat the purpose of a level 1 challenge. The simple solution is to scale it the way KH2 did. It would admittedly be a tad tricky to pull this off properly with food and keyblade upgrading, but I'm certain it would work. At the end of the day, I don't see anyone that would dislike this change, to be honest. In Cage 2, you deal low damage early in the game because you're not considered underleveled in the first couple worlds, but after that, the game's smart scaling takes over so that you can at least do decent damage always. This is what I want to see happen in Cage 3. That's about it for combat. Likely I'm forgetting a few things, but I believe I covered the main issues while tacking on some smaller nitpicks that are easy fixes. In the end, we definitely have quite a few good things going on with the combat system in this game, but it needs some proper tweaks and balances to make it work well and be more fluid. I'm a tad worried that if we all call for these nerfs on certain things, that if they ignore proper damage scaling, that it could ruin any chance of critical mode or level 1 playthroughs having a good time with proper damage output, since as it is, it takes extra work to have a good time due to chip damage. Our next category of concern I will go over is the menu system. I'm not going to praise the menu system once again because it is still very solid, but some design choices were downright confusing. For starters, if you go to synth everything in the game, it becomes a huge chore to have to keep looking up what you already synthed. That makes no sense to me because KH2 has always done it fine, where you can tell what you synthed in the synth menu. In this game, there is no indication that you synthed something already without having to back out of the synth menu and open up the Gummi phone to repeatedly check it. Next, when it comes to food, it's really bizarre that you can't just simply see what full course bonus ability is applied without spamming Chef's Choice. If you can spam that to see anyway, why not just let the player see it when they fill in the slots? It would be far more effective that way. That's one other menu issue that made no sense to me and made me wonder if they intended something else here with the full course bonus. Yet another small menu concern is why you must press a button to complete a load screen. I can't speak for others, but since some load screens in this game can be a bit lengthy, I tend to do things on my computer while waiting for the load, only to turn around and realize the load finished and just needed me to press confirm. That definitely boggles my mind why they did that. I can't think of any practical reason this feature exists. The next weird menu design was forcing you to constantly update your customized menu for the newer magic tiers. For example, if you have Fire customized and obtain Fire, you must go back into the customized menu to specify you want to use Fire instead of Fire. I appreciate the choice to use lower tier magic, perhaps as a self-imposed challenge even, but I know I've heard people complain that they didn't even realize they were using base magic for a long time. The game really should simply auto-update your customizes to the newest tiers, and if the player chooses for some reason not to do that, which sounds very uncommon, then they should choose to change it. Last menu complaint would be the way photos and lucky emblems are handled. First off, it bugs me that in the Gummi phone, the photo section can obviously never have a Mickey symbol on it, making it the only section that feels incomplete. The real offender here, though, to me, is that your 100 slots of photos gets filled up very easily when hunting lucky emblems. There are 90 lucky emblems, and if you don't delete them manually out of your photo section, you'll be left with 10 photo slots, which isn't even enough for the Moogle picture quests. The simple solution here is to have the lucky emblem pictures not be added to photos, since those pictures get added to the lucky emblems part of the Gummi phone anyway. An additional menu feature I'd like is a cutscene option to skip a batch of cutscenes that are chained together. The series never really does this, but due to the load times in KH3 being longer than desired, it would be nice if we could skip a batch of cutscenes instead of have to wait slowly for each one to load just to want to skip it anyway. Most people that play the game multiple times don't usually like to sit through the cutscenes each time, or prefer to watch only specific scenes on multiple playthroughs, so this seems like it would be a nifty feature that I see no disadvantage to. Rushing into this next category of concern, we have movement. Funny enough, there really isn't much to complain about here. Movement in this game to me is one of the highlights of it. They overall did a great job. But one thing that still irks me is the same issue 0.2 had, and that's the new love for these auto interactions of movement with terrain. The amount of times I've wanted to just go do something specific just to end up auto-hopping instead, and having my input get eaten got a little tiring. Since auto-hopping I don't believe is at all necessary to the gameplay, I'd love for an option to disable it. Of course, it should be on by default, but no, I don't really want to auto-hop over a railing that I can simply just press the jump button to clear. Now this next complaint is actually something that does bug me a ton, and that's the way glide was handled in this game. It is pretty clear to me that Keyblade Graveyard was not designed with glide in mind. Not only does it break the puzzles there, but it breaks the fights too. If you're ever unsure how to dodge a desperation move, you can usually glide, and glide in this game also does not drop you very fast. For example, in the Marluxia and Larxene fight, when they DM, you can glide it without any effort in actually having to dodge the DM. There are a couple easy fixes to this, one of which is to bring glide to the ground faster, so that you're gliding at ground level quickly, similar to other games in the series. Or you could just simply push glide until after the Triple Xehanort fight, since nothing in Scala currently gets broken by glide. On the plus side, there is a glitch where you can quickly glide from a jump by switching keyblades, which hopefully they don't patch out. I also low-key miss glide being mapped to the square button, though maybe now they didn't want that due to air slide and air guard. The next category to discuss would be exploration. This is a little confusing to me. In Cage 3 we have large vast worlds, and although some are pretty linear glorified hallways, some, like Pirates, are giant in exploration. In Cage 1 we had fairly open worlds where we could go different paths without restrictions. Many people complained that it wasn't clear where to go a lot, such as in Deep Jungle. So in Cage 2 and other Cage games afterwards, they heavily limit your path and give you clear instructions. They block you from going wrong paths a lot as well. In Cage 3, you can go the wrong way in some worlds or explore away from the normal path, which is great, although some instances the game tries really hard to stop you from going the wrong way, to the point where party members will non-stop yell at you where to go. At this point, I'm just confused why the game doesn't just take a better approach at telling players where to go, but also leaving worlds a tad more open to the player without harassing them what to do. In this regard, I think the Xenoblade series does this amazingly well. They always have an arrow at the top of the screen that helps you go towards your story goal, or in some instances towards a custom set goal. It wasn't perfect, but I think between something like that and either a pause screen text objective or up left text box objective, it would work much better than having your party members have to constantly yell at you where to go in case you felt like not rushing to the next area. It's not just the constant backseating from them, though. I would say specifically, Dolan is incredibly annoying and ear-grating in this game. I know what you're thinking, isn't he always this way? Yes, but this game introduced character-spoken field dialogue, similar to what Final Fantasy XV does. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't need to hear Dolan speak at 0.5 speed about ingredients every single time I pass one. I really think they could have implemented an option to disable these lines, and some of them even only play once, such as having to hear Sully thank us for saving the company 150 times while grinding for sinister items for synthing. I would say it's an oversight, but simple game testing I imagine would solve this if the testers said, hey, this is kind of annoying, why do they always say these things? So between this and the way they handle your progression of the story and exploration, I really think they could tweak it a bit to be even better. Last tiny thing to mention here is the ability to zoom out of the goddamn map. We now have large open environments to explore, so what good does it really do having a map when it's so zoomed in you can't tell where you really are anyway? All it serves at that point is to tell you if you're about to hit a wall. In 2019, we should have a simple map design of zooming in and out if we wish to, as well as a full map display somewhere would also be a nice addition as well.
This might be a good spot to find some ingredients.
Moving on to the next section, I would like to discuss gummies a bit. As I've said earlier, they are pretty okay this time around, but I would still like to nitpick a couple things that I feel like may be possible fixes. These are mostly only an issue if you're trying to 100% the gummy missions. The first would be making it so you can better tell where specific gummy missions are on a map. To me, it became tedious trying to figure out which gummy missions I've already done. You can't do them all in one go either because they respawn with time. To me, that makes little sense to make this process that much more annoying than it needs to be. If you're missing, say, one more gummy mission in a zone, it's a chore to hunt it down unless it's an obvious boss. There are definitely a few different ways they can change it so you can find these missing gummy missions better. The other main issue that bugged me was the flag feature. You can mark areas of the zone map with the flag to know which direction to fly, but for some weird reason it takes a whopping 5 seconds for the flag to show up at first. This sounds pretty small of an issue, and while it generally is, it also means you're likely to just sit there waiting for the flag to load in so you can fly in the correct direction. I don't see why the flag icon shouldn't load in as soon as the gummy gameplay loads. That should be a super simple fix, since I don't believe they intended you to have to sit still and wait for it like that. Finally, we will speak about the Disney worlds. I won't go into story details about it, but I will explain what I disliked in each world from the gameplay. First, we have Olympus. This world to me was one of the stronger Disney worlds. Aside from the messy designed Titan fights, this world was a very solid one, and I have nothing really bad to say about the world. Toy Box, on the other hand, had me much more disappointed than I thought I would be, though. The main issue this world has is that it's entirely too based on fighting in mechs. Trying to fight mechs without using one yourself is an incredible handicap and not really worth your time when you can generally one-shot another mech using one yourself. Mechs themselves aren't tedious or anything to use, they are smooth to control and work just fine, but to me it's just glorified minigame combat, which is what I want to stay away from in the Cage series, and having a whole world have entirely too many forced mech fights put me to sleep. Unfortunately, I don't think this design will change with patches and DLC. Next up was Corona, and that was yet another solid Disney World for me. Honestly, the only thing that bugged me here, other than the forest exploring being a little tough to find your way around, was that you can't keep Rapunzel on your team after the world is done. I understand for story reasons why, but it sucks because she had her own limit that you can't see again once you beat the world. In the next group of worlds, we have Monsters Inc. Monsters was quite interesting, especially the more I played it. By far, the worst part of the world for me was the boss here. I really don't know design-wise how they intended you to do the fight, but 90% of the fight, the boss has extremely high defense, so you're basically slowly whittling down its HP until it goes into its DM phase, where its defenses are gone, but you easily get smacked around trying to damage it. So it's where you can deal the most damage, but also where you randomly will get hit the most, making it tedious. I also thought it was a tad silly to have these interesting laser segment mechanics, but why bother doing them when you can simply just dodge roll through the whole segment unharmed? Now we get to Frozen. I think there are a few problems with this world, first being that it felt like it dragged on longer than it should have. In the game, Dolan even pokes fun at this, but the amount of mountain climbing you do is absurd. You get to Frozen, and right away you climb up. After you escape Larxine's labyrinth, you climb up again for a bit. Then you must climb up again even more. Then you climb down. It gets tiring after a while, since snow mountain climbing can only be so fun and interesting after a while. Larxine's labyrinth is also a tad boring to me. It's a dull and bland, lifeless dungeon where you just do some forced mob fights against one of the more annoying enemies in the game, Larxine's nobodies. Although Simba is so insane, he just brain-dead wins those fights anyway without needing to think. I think most people also take issue that there is never a town visit in this world, such as in Corona. That could have helped with too much mountain climbing and perhaps improve upon the story a bit. Last thing I think many took issue with the most was the Skull boss fight. When it comes to boss fights, I don't always like to jump to conclusions without fully understanding the mechanics of the enemy, but as of right now, that fight isn't exactly terribly well designed. There are good parts to it, and cinematically it's awesome, but there are also lots of waiting around for safe openings if you want to go for physical combos, which are not too often, and then otherwise you're better off spamming from a distance. The DM was a cool idea, but the projectiles from above pretty much randomly strike you and also stun you. I think that fight, on top of the repetitive mountain climbing combined with the labyrinth, is the reason this world didn't stick with me too much, while also not being too high on others' list of good Disney worlds in the game. Also, just to tack this on, I definitely did not like the minigame with the dragons you do sliding down the mountain. Moving on to the next world, oh boy do we have a controversial one. One of the worlds I was most looking forward to was this one from its initial trailer, and, similar to Toy Box, I was greatly let down and nearly for the same reason. I did praise good aspects of the world earlier in the video, but this is the bad, so let me explain. This world tends to be an extremely love or hate world. Some people say it's hands down the best world, while others say it's the worst world in the series. Where do I stand in this? Let's start with the main problem I have with this world, and that's the boat fights. If you don't enjoy the boat fighting mechanic, you won't have much of a reason to love this world. It is extremely overdone, and each time it's pretty much the same thing. You shoot the enemy ship's orbs to one-shot the ship, and then you get a situation command, you use it. There's no depth to the ship combat, it's just a glorified minigame. They should have had less forced ones and then have the others be possible optional quests or something similar to avoid spamming it on people who don't like it. Another large disappointment of the world for me was the underwater combat. This had a lot of promise at first, but I shortly realized that the water combat in the game was extremely restricted, which in turn made it very boring. Now, is it KH1 Atlantica level of bad? No, but when they teased it in the trailer, it seemed like it would be pretty neat. As it turns out, in water combat you can only physically attack with the same 4-hit combo or use a few low-tier spells. There are no situation commands, no shot lock, no links, no air step, nothing. Now I understand having some restrictions, but this many cuts to the combat system makes it too repetitive to want to do water combat. It's so disappointing that I'm relieved you're only forced to do 2 fights underwater in the whole game. Yet another huge issue with this world is the raging vulture fight. They gave entirely too many HP bars to a minigame boss here. And as it turns out, if you don't get your strength stat to 35, you do incredible chip damage to the boss. So in low level or level 1 playthroughs, you better be prepared to go out of your way to beef up your strength just for this fight, or you're going to spend 10 minutes trying to win this fight with chip damage. It's just all around an awful fight. It's easy to get randomly hit too during this as well from behind occasionally. I don't see why it was a good idea to give this minigame boss so much HP. It was yet another bad gimmick fight that's more annoying than fun. I do also consider 300 crab collecting a bit stupid. It was an obvious attempt to force you to explore the town area just to give you a reason to be there. Otherwise, the town area is pointless. When I first got there, I felt a bit frustrated because in the first area of the town there are barely any crabs, so I had the feeling it would take forever. As it turns out, there are a couple hot spots of crabs, and one is at the very end of the area, so most players won't come across the easy crabs too fast, which is why on a first playthrough, this seems pretty awful. I really don't know how they can fix this though, other than just toss more crabs sooner into the area to at least hint to the player that it won't be nearly as bad. Either way, it felt sloppily executed on an otherwise already messy world. Last problem I'd point out in this world is that the frame rate in town is just plain garbage. This is something I think they can fix with patching and hopefully will, but as of right now it strains my eyes trying to move around in town when the frame rate dips so hard. The rest of the world has similar issues, but in town it seems far worse. For reference, I'm running PS4 Pro at 1080p 60 FPS, which is considered optimal way to limit frame drops in the game. Adding all these world's issues together, I greatly dislike this place and was heavily disappointed by it. I can't see them trying to fix most of these issues, but like I said, if you enjoy ship combat, you will probably still love this world. Or unless the exploration aspect of the world skyrockets your opinion that much. Finally, moving on to the last Disney World, we have San Francisco. There were only a couple issues I had with this world, first being that the city felt very lifeless until you beat the world. It's still a huge step over previous games, but there still needs to be some improvement in areas like this. Even after you beat the world and come back, there still really isn't anything going on, just some people walking around and some drivers. Secondly, I had a problem with the way Dark Baymax was done. The entire fight being on the back of Baymax made it incredibly boring and basically turned it into a minigame gimmick boss fight, which is not really what I wanted for the final Disney World. I don't see why they couldn't have made half the fight on Baymax, while the other half a normal fight. Holding down R2 the whole fight while moving around just doesn't do it for me, and made for a weak end to the Disney Worlds from the gameplay side for me. I don't even feel like it's worth mentioning 100 Acre Woods, but yes, I hated that world too. I was never a fan of it, and I feel like it overstayed its welcome after KH1. Now we're at the point where its only reason to exist is to have one dumb mobile minigame spammed in it. Time to bring on the miscellaneous segment of this. For this section, I will point out other issues that didn't quite easily fit into other categories. First up, many of us are confused by this, but there are only 9 available save slots for Kingdom Hearts 3. This was a giant disappointment to me, because oftentimes in my games I save slot a lot. For example, if I'm playing a Final Fantasy, I love to save slot areas or before intense bosses. In KH3, having only 9 slots doesn't leave you with much room to save slot each world, and also won't help you if you want to have multiple playthroughs. It makes little sense to me why this is the way it is, because in 0.2 we had 99 save slots, and that game was 2 hours of gameplay. In KH1 and KH2 we had 99 save slots as well we could use. To me, this is unacceptable. I have to abuse multiple PS4 Pro files to make save slots for playthroughs, or USB drive abuse. Now, this isn't to say that other game companies don't also do this terribly. Some people may say, you're lucky to even have the ability for more than one save. But this isn't the standard most of the rest of the series set. I've heard excuses why it's this way, such as having only 9 saves is nearly 700 megabytes of space, but I'm not convinced that's exactly why. Others have said it's due to the way photos work in the game as well, but I'm willing to bet a company like Square can figure out how to let us have more save slots if we have the hard drive space. I highly doubt me having access to more save slots is going to quickly fill up my 1 terabyte drive when we can do silly workarounds anyway. The next rather common complaint is the likely clearly cut Scala content. Square at the point of this video has not stated, far as I know, if Scala was supposed to be more than just the final boss fights, but to me it feels clear as day that more is supposed to happen here. The world has its own themes that barely play, there's no exploration that isn't in a fight, and just the fact it's the final world is a red flag. Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 had rather large final worlds that were interesting and intense. It makes no sense that Scala would be the final world with nothing to it. If that truly is the case, that's severely disappointing that such an interesting world won't ever be improved. Next complaint is a bit small, but at the same time, I've heard many people also hate this, and that's the music changing whenever you whip out a Link or attraction. Nothing breaks the intensity of an epic fight more than bringing out Meow Wow and having the music be butchered. There are some parts of the game where they don't change the music, but they should just simply have a toggle option for this. They can even leave it on by default for players, but I personally hate when they break apart the awesome soundtrack of the game, so it would make many of us much happier to have this option. Yet another small complaint, but one people still ask for, is having a soft reset. This one super surprised me because once again, 0.2 had one. Up until KH3, only KH2 had no soft reset while the rest of the series did, but KH3 for some reason has none. And that's quite unfortunate because it definitely is a pain to go to a save point to quit to the title screen. Times where you'd want to do this normally would be in situations such as tossing postcards into the mailbox for that Orichalcum Plus, or trying to get excellent on all foods, where if you mess up you may want to reset to not lose ingredients and have to go gather them all over again. This seems like it should be a simple programmable option that has no reason not to suddenly exist again when they put it back in after KH2. Tacking on another small complaint is how easy it is to trigger a situation command when trying to open a chest. As a player, it really is fully my fault that I pressed triangle too quickly when I know I can just wait an extra second to open a chest safely, but I do have to ask, is it really a bad idea to simply disable situation commands when outside of a fight? That seems like a pretty smart fix for that. Next, we have songs that loop pretty annoyingly. Two areas that stood out to me was the Toy Box boss song and the Xehanort clones fight. Those songs loop so terribly that it can distract you from the fight. And this is not common for Square to have songs that loop terribly, so I don't know if they intend to try to fix it, but I felt it was worth pointing out. Now let me quickly rant on the ability layout of this game. In KH3, all abilities that are gained from levels are on Sora by level 50. This is honestly not a huge deal due to lack of post-game content. There's no reason you'd need to hit that level anyway, and you would likely hit level 40 by the final boss if not playing too fast. But my problem lies with how easy it is to obtain Withstand Combo, formerly known as Once More, and Second Chance abilities. If you go Guardian route option at the beginning of the game, you get Withstand Combo at level 4. That's one of the biggest blows to difficulty this game can do. If they don't rebalance ability layouts like they did in 2FM, then a critical mode won't even matter. Just pick Guardian route, you'll get Withstand Combo at level 4 still, and not have an issue for most of the game, I'd imagine. Those abilities are supposed to be at least somewhat of a challenge to get. In 2FM, if you pick Defender route, you get Once More at level 25 and Second Chance at level 49. Any other options gives them to you later. Imagine that game if you got Once More leaving Beast's Castle. It's the same flaw BBS and DDD have, where the game allows you to easily obtain those abilities early and steamroll the game without fear. I'm all for allowing players to over-prepare in games if they choose, but those abilities should always be harder to obtain than at the beginning of the game without even trying. I think now is a good time to tackle the abomination that is the Kupo coin. So in this game, you can buy a Kupo coin for 400 money, and this coin allows you to survive dying once in a fight. You can only hold one at a time, and once it's used, you must buy it again. So what's the problem with this? Well, imagine if in KH2, Mickey could show up in every single fight in the game, but you just had to dump 400 money into accessing him each time. It would hurt the game's overall difficulty heavily. The abilities Second Chance and Withstand Combo are supposed to be your extra shot at surviving fights once you learn them. In no way should you be allowed to be fighting a super boss and just get saved by a Kupo coin you bought for 400 money. Personally, I sincerely hope this coin is removed from critical mode. I can definitely imagine players doing crit, but abusing the coin to get past most fights that would be considered a challenge, instead of learning the fights, which is what high difficulty is supposed to make you do. And no, I'm not defending Mickey and KH2 either, since I didn't really like that mechanic as well. But having this mechanic return, and instead of only being a handful of selected fights, having this coin work in every single fight in the game was a terrible choice and slap in the face of high difficulty players. If players don't want to struggle in fights and have an easy baby mode time, that's what beginner mode is for. I would love for them to take out this coin completely. I doubt they will do that, but I was not a fan of this, as many others were not as well. There will always be the moronic responses of just don't use it, but those cop-out counter-arguments don't ignore the problem at hand and still doesn't help improve bad design. If bad design is not fixed, then it will persist to exist in future games. Last misc thing I'd toss in here is the load times. Now this game doesn't really have garbage load times by any means, but it makes me wonder if they can fix it to be faster still. This happened in KH2 originally, where they released 2FM on PS2, and it had faster loads than original KH2 did, which was cool to see. So that finally brings us to the conclusion of this video. In the end, as I've said before, this game was still a really fun first playthrough. I think it's easy to forget that for Osaka Team, this is easily their best KH game to date, so for that, I give them credit for improving. I do, however, hope they continue to remove many of the flaws that their design tends to bring to the table. Some of this stuff likely won't be changed, but just getting it out there is better than saying nothing or just saying you didn't like parts of the game because they weren't good. I really do wish we would hear more from the development side of this game, because some of the more interesting things I've heard is Tai Yasue talking about dev choices and design for KH3, and it's easy to see how passionate he is about the game succeeding. So I hope this video helps get things noticed to be fixed, as well as point out things they did well. I feel as if we're on the right track, but just barely missing solid design in some aspects. If I need to clarify points in this video some more, I may do so in other videos, so don't worry if something isn't clear. As always, thanks for watching.